Hey guys, tonight we're slipping past blood-red walls under a moon that's seen it all, into a palace where silence screams louder than war drums. You glide across marble so polished it reflects your fear back at you. The air tastes like powdered pearls and incensed smoke. Somewhere behind a lacquered door, someone's plotting your end over tea. You're just a woman, but in the Ming Dynasty's forbidden city. That makes you a live grenade with rouge on. This is the story of a concubine so beloved, she got promoted above the emperor's own wife. But don't be fooled by the silk and poetry. This tale is sown with jealousy, surveillance, and more political backstabbing than a reality show set in Versailles. You're about to walk halls where blinking you're dead was a standard vibe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and what time. It is where you're watching. I love seeing how far our sleepy little empire stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself inside the forbidden city, the emperor's cage of a palace. Not a single tree grows taller than the roofs. Why? Because nothing in the world is allowed to overshadow the Son of Heaven. And here, in the hushed, humming silence of a courtyard at dawn, you realize you're in a world where color equals control. Crimson columns for divine power, yellow tiles for imperial authority, white jade balustrades for purity, which is ironic considering how many impure thoughts are brewed daily over court ladies' necklines. You trail your hand along a carved dragon as you enter the inner quarters, where the real war happens. Not swords and arrows, but silks, smiles, and strategically timed tea. This is the realm of concubines, hundreds of them, selected for looks, luck, and the slight chance of producing a future emperor. Most will never be touched. A few will catch the emperor's eye. One will dominate him entirely. That's Lady Wan. But before she was Lady Wan, she was just a merchant's daughter in Suzhou. And before she was a merchant's daughter, she was a baby with no reason to believe she'd one day sit at the heart of a dynasty's hormonal hurricane. But we're not there yet. For now, you're just breathing in a space, though heavily perfumed, you're 90% sure it violates modern air safety laws. You hear the rustle of silk's concubines gliding past like ghosts in embroidered slippers. Every one of them smiles with their mouths and glares with their eyeliner. There's no such thing as off-duty when you're a woman in this palace. Even when you sleep, you're still being compared, measured, judged. The emperor's harem isn't just a spa day with occasional cuddles. It's a full-blown bureaucracy. There's a head concubine, assisted concubines, rankings so complex they need a spreadsheet. And yes, scholars have tried. Historians still argue whether the selection process for women was more about aesthetics or political alliance. Some say noble families pushed their daughters in for influence. Others insist regional quotas turned the harem into an accidental census bureau. Tonight, though, you're focused on the thick, muffled atmosphere that wraps around you like a velvet noose. Somewhere deep in the palace, a 15-year-old girl is having her hair styled in the phoenix wings pattern. That girl is Lady Wan, and she's still new, still whispering Suzhou poetry under her breath when no one's listening, still unaware she's about to shatter every hierarchy in the concubine playbook. She's been here a year. She's prettier than most, but prettier doesn't guarantee survival. In fact, it often paints a target between your shoulder blades. She's smart, but not loud. That's key. The palace doesn't reward volume, it rewards perfect pitch. She's learned to curtsy just 1 second longer than others. She laughs at jokes half a second sooner. Her eyes never meet anyone's for more than 2 seconds. You've learned that. Staring too long is defiance. Too short is cowardice. The sweet spot is somewhere between I see you and you imagine me. One night, the emperor visits the Western Garden, random, unannounced. His mood sour. He's been yelling about rice taxes and southern pirates. The palace trembles when he's moody. But someone suggests music, someone else, wine, and someone, probably bribed, mentions a girl from Suzhou with a voice like falling rain. Lady Wan is summoned. She bows low, doesn't speak unless spoken to. The emperor grunts. She sings. Something happens. Maybe it's her voice. Maybe it's the fact she doesn't seem desperate. Maybe it's sheer coincidence. But the emperor lingers. That's all it takes. What follows is a slow burn, no fireworks, just a quiet, persistent presence. She's called again and again. Soon, her quarters are moved closer to his. Her meals improve. Her enemies multiply. She gets nicer hairpins and nastier rumors. You hear whispers, some say she uses ancient love charms made of mandrake and peach blossom, others say she's just really good at Go, the board game, and that the Emperor likes a challenge. Fringe theories even claim she fakes fainting in just the right poetic way. Historians still debate whether her rise was truly based on affection or political positioning. Did she love him? Did he love her? Hard to say, but the results are undeniable. She's becoming indispensable, and everyone notices, including the Empress. You drift further into the story, eyes heavy now. The palace winds around you like a maze built from perfume and protocol. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a bell. Not loud, just enough to signal that another day is over and another night of silent warfare has begun. You trace the steps of Lady Wan back to Suzhou, long before imperial bells governed her mornings. Suzhou isn't just any city, it's a silk-draped postcard of canals and crooked bridges, where the air smells like lotus tea and bureaucracy. If Hangzhou is heaven, Suzhou is the waiting room with better snacks. It's here, nestled between scroll merchants and gossipy matchmakers, that a girl is born into a merchant family. Not noble, not poor, just rich enough to have good shoes, but not rich enough to dodge politics. Her family deals in silks and lacquerware, the lifeblood of Ming elegance. And Lady Wan, well, she isn't Lady Wan yet. She's just a girl with a soft voice, quick wit, and too much curiosity for a place that prefers quiet daughters. Her name is Wan Jenner, and nobody, not even her neighbors, suspects she'll one day rewrite the rulebook on concubine power dynamics. Suzhou raises her like a bonsai, trimmed, shaped, elegant. She learns embroidery, poetry, calligraphy, and how to smile without showing teeth. She watches women around her disappear into marriages like smoke into incense burners. Her mother warns her, ambition in a girl is like thunder in spring, it might wake the crops. But it also scares the man dot, and then the imperial draft comes. The Ming court periodically sweeps the empire for beautiful, unmarried girls between the ages of 13 and 17. It's called palace selection, but it's more like a beauty pageant meets Hunger Games, minus the actual murder, at least at first. Families can't refuse unless they want to be labeled disloyal. Some push their daughters forward hoping for imperial favor. Others pray their names get lost in the scroll shuffle. Lady Wan's father, he doesn't fight it. Maybe he thinks her bookish demeanor will protect her. Maybe he sees opportunity. Maybe he's just afraid. Either way, her name is called. She packs a satchel with silk ribbons, tears up halfway through a farewell poem, and boards a covered boat toward Beijing. A life erased with a single chop from the district magistrate's seal. Once selected, girls become state property. Technically, you've just been elevated. Realistically, your livestock with better perfume. The journey north takes weeks, and she changes with every mile. The girl who left Suzhou humming tunes now stares silently at the gray waters of the Grand Canal. She listens to older girls whisper horror stories about palace life. One says a concubine once got flayed alive for stepping on the emperor's shadow. Another swears you can get poisoned by accident if you sit too close to the wrong eunuch. Most of these stories are half true. That's what makes them terrifying. When they finally arrive, the palace looms like a hallucination, golden roofs stacked like folded dragons, walls so tall they block the sun. Inside, everything smells like sandalwood and imperial nerves. She's processed like a new recruit. There's a physical exam, a horoscope reading. Even her handwriting is judged, because if you're going to live in a palace obsessed with symbolism, every brush stroke counts. Then begins the training. The girls are drilled in court etiquette, taught how to walk exactly 17 steps behind royalty, and warned never to speak unless prompted. You're told to wear your rank like a shadow, always present, never loud. Lady One adapts quickly. Other girls notice. One warns her, don't stand out unless you can fly. She gets her first assignment, a low-ranked maiden waiting in the outer harem quarters. This is the concubine equivalent of being the office intern, who only gets coffee and the flu. But she watches, learns, memorizes who gets summoned most, who gets ignored, which corridors echo with plotting and which ones with weeping. The palace is alive, a living scroll written in whispers and footfall patterns. One fringe tidbit: some concubines intentionally give themselves mild fevers, hoping the emperor will visit their quarters out of concern. Nothing screams romance like weaponized body temperature. Others fake fainting, learn astrology, or stage sudden strategic musical recitals whenever the emperor is passing by. Lady One doesn't do any of that. Not yet. She waits. Historians still argue whether her patience was natural or tactical. Did she bide her time instinctively, or was she already planning her ascent? Either way, she stays under the radar for months, maybe a year, until the night she's summoned to serve at an imperial banquet. Nothing flashy, just pouring tea and standing still. But that night, she meets him, the Emperor, Concubine. He's moody, tired, maybe a bit drunk. Not a tyrant, but definitely not a romantic hero either. His reign has been rocky, full of northern threats, internal squabbles, and Confucius scholars who judge every sigh he makes. He looks at her once, doesn't say a word, moves on. The next day, her name appears on the roster for inner court attendance. That's the turning point. From then on, she's seen more, noticed. Her meals improve. Her quarters move a few doors closer to the imperial chambers. It's not favoritism, not yet, but it's the beginning of a shift so subtle you wouldn't notice unless you were watching for it, and everyone is watching. The palace doesn't run on laws. It runs on glances and hallway coincidences. Lady Wan is navigating it like a spy in silk. She starts to get invited to more evening music gatherings, poetry readings, even once to a late-night ghost session, not with the Emperor yet, but with his scholars. Every move she makes is recorded, manually if not in ink, by the eunuchs who run this place like a shadow government. Then, one night, she's asked to read a poem aloud. Her voice is low, steady, Suzhou accented. She reads Song of Everlasting Regret, and halfway through, the room changes. Eyes flick toward her. Someone coughs awkwardly. She finishes. The Emperor doesn't speak, but that night, she's summoned, and everything changes again. You're summoned at dusk. The hour when shadows sharpen, and the palace softens into its most dangerous form. The golden tiles above you catch the last of the sun. You walk slowly, careful not to outrun your own breath. The eunuch ahead doesn't. Explain. He doesn't need to. This path, winding past the hall of literary brilliance and under the carved eaves of the gate of heavenly purity, only leads to one place, His Majesty's private quarters. The moment feels too fragile to trust. You've heard stories, dozens of them, of girls summoned once, never again, of favorites replaced midweek, of an emperor who changes moods like sleeves. But tonight, you're the one crossing the red threshold, and when the screen door closes behind you, the world outside dissolves. He's there, the Chenghu Emperor, younger than you expected and smaller too, not in height, but in presence. He doesn't radiate the divine thunder you imagined. He looks tired, like a man who has lived along in his own legend and no longer finds it interesting. You kneel, bow, wait. The silence stretches. Then a voice tells you to sit. You obey. He asks your name. You tell him, softly. He asks where you're from. You say Suzhou, though your accent already betrayed that 3 words ago. He nods. Then, quietly, he asks if you can sing. You say yes, because of course you do. You sing an old folk melody, one your mother taught you before bedtime. As your voice weaves through the perfumed stillness, something in his expression changes. Just a flicker. That's all it takes. The next morning, you are moved again. Closer. Higher. The other women notice. Of course they do. There are no secrets in a palace full of people trained to read lips from across courtyards. Some say you enchanted him. Others say you remind him of someone, a dead lover, perhaps, or a painting from his youth. One particularly bitter maid suggests you've bribed the right eunuchs with sandalwood combs and sly glances. You don't argue. You don't explain. You just keep moving up, and suddenly, you are no longer just a pretty girl from Suzhou. You are Lady Wan, consort of the 5th rank. The Emperor doesn't just visit you. He lingers. He listens when you speak. He stops mid-meeting to ask about your health. You begin influencing the menu, the garden arrangements, the schedule of poetry readings. Then the real shift comes. One morning, you vomit. A physician is called. Silence follows. And then the imperial edict. You are with child, pregnancy, and the Forbidden City is never just about babies. It's about power, lineage, survival. A concubine's womb is a political volcano, and yours has just erupted across every hierarchy. The Empress, Wu, hears about it before lunch. Her reaction, not exactly celebratory. Her position, already shaky from court politics and the Emperor's disinterest, is now in actual danger. Because if you give birth to a son and that son lives, you're no longer just a consort. You're the mother of a potential emperor that comes with influence, land, Titles, enemies. You're watched constantly. Your food is tasted by 3 people before it reaches your lips. Your sheets are changed daily. A midwife is stationed permanently outside your room, but danger has a way of wearing a mask. One morning, your favorite attendant is found unconscious. Near your quarters, she survives, but the message is clear. One slip, one cup of wine poured by the wrong hand. Your story ends here. Historians still argue whether the emperor knew how deep the palace's hatred for you ran. Some believe he was naively in love, blind to the dangers surrounding his favorite. Others think he knew and chose to ignore it. Regardless, he reacts. You are moved into a more secure suite, guarded by his most loyal eunuchs. He starts skipping council meetings, delaying petitions, even postponing religious ceremonies just to sit beside you and rub your ankles while you complain about the morning sickness. Court officials begin whispering, this isn't just favoritism, it's distraction, it's negligence. It's a governance crisis wrapped in silk. Then the baby arrives. A boy, healthy, strong. You name him Zhu Yaoqing, the palace bells ring. There's a feast. Poems are commissioned. Gifts arrive from every corner of the empire. You are radiant, glowing, untouchable, for now. Because in the Forbidden City, joy is always rented, and the lease is short. Your son is barely a toddler when it happens. A sudden fever, coughing, convulsions. Within a day, he's dead. No warning, no explanation. The emperor is inconsolable. You collapse for days. You don't eat. The court mourns, but behind closed doors, rumors coil like incense smoke. Was it an accident? Was it sabotage, poison Kenji, or something darker? Some blame the empress, others blame jealous concubines. A few even mutter about the eunuchs, those ever-smiling keepers of palace secrets. No one is punished. No one is accused. The death is recorded as natural causes, but nothing about it feels natural. You mourn like a mother. The emperor mourns, like a man who has lost his anchor. And yet here's the twist: this loss, this unbearable rupture, only deepens his attachment to you. You are now the vessel of both his greatest joy and his deepest grief. He clings to you more fiercely, protects you more obsessively, and the palace, it simmers. Because a concubine who has lost a child should retreat, fade, vanish into ritual silence. But you stay, you rise. You return to the court not in disgrace, but in darker silks, widow black, but still elegant. The kind that says, I have suffered, but I still matter, and you do. In fact, you matter more than ever, because now, you're not just the emperor's favorite, you're the mother of his dead son. And grief, when mixed with obsession, turns into something stickier than love. Cheng Hua begins spending even more time in your quarters. He starts having his evening meals there. Sometimes, he brings imperial paperwork only to forget it halfway. Through a conversation about how your jasmine tea helps him sleep. The council notices, his ministers notice, the empress notices. And let's just say she doesn't respond by sending fruit baskets. Her silence is cold. Her gifts, if any, are calculated. She begins reasserting her ceremonial duties, hosting court rituals with a stiffness that makes the room tremble. But she can feel it. The balance is tipping. You are still technically a consort of the 5th rank, but in practice, you're the sun around which his day orbits, and that terrifies everyone. Because if a woman who bore a child and lost him can still hold the emperor's heart, what's to stop her from claiming more? Tensions rise. Protocols tighten. You're invited to fewer public ceremonies. Your name is omitted from a seasonal poetry anthology. Little slights, meant to clip your wings without drawing blood. But you endure. You adapt. You start playing the game your way. You send small gifts to powerful eunuchs. You learn which court ladies are loyal to the empress and which are merely adjacent. You smile more often, but speak less. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're grieving into silence. Meanwhile, the emperor, he begins rewriting court etiquette around you. He issues a quiet directive. When Lady Wan is ill, he is not to be disturbed. When Lady Wan hosts a private musical gathering, all imperial affairs may wait until morning. The scholars seize. They write veiled critiques, parables about distracted emperors and collapsed kingdoms. One brave minister submits a direct memorial criticizing His Majesty's favoritism. The emperor responds by demoting him to broom duty in the Bureau of Salt. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether this was love or addiction. Did Cheng Hua see you as an equal, a partner, or as a beautiful escape from the burdens of empire. Some records suggest you spoke openly with him about politics, that you advised him on punishments and promotions. Others claim you simply sat beside him, humming lullabies, giving him the illusion of control while you stared from behind a silk screen. Either way, your influence grows, and that's when the real conflict ignites. Because Empress Wu has been patient, but not passive. She begins mobilizing her faction Confucian scholars, conservative officials, older dowagers in the imperial clan, who remember when concubines knew their place. They draft formal objections, cite ancient precedents, quote Zhou Dynasty etiquette manuals like divine scripture. And at the center of every complaint, you, the emperor, holds firm for now. But you know the tide is turning, not because he loves you less, but because the pressure is mounting. Every choice he makes now must pass through a fog of rumors. If he promotes a man whose cousin once died near your quarters, it's favoritism. If he issues a policy you once casually mentioned over soup, it's corruption. You become a scapegoat for all things unpopular, and you begin to feel the walls closing in. So, you change strategy. You host a tea gathering for dowagers. You organize a charitable embroidery drive for winter cloaks. You send a handwritten poem to the Empress herself, a soft, passive-aggressive gesture dripping with perfectly measured respect. She doesn't respond, but she also doesn't retaliate. That's a win. Still, not everyone plays nice. Some concubines try more direct methods. One slips ground lotus seed, actually a mild sedative, into your tea. Another orders her maid to trip you in the garden. You stay standing. You always do. But the incidents accumulate. One night, your favorite hairpin goes missing, only to be found broken near a drainage pit. Another time, your birdcage is opened, the imperial parrot released. A small thing, but the symbolism isn't lost on you. You are replaceable, it says, and you are watched. You sleep with one eye open now. Trust no one. Your personal staff is replaced entirely at your own request with southern girls who speak your dialect. At least then you know what they whisper. One fringe tidbit that's floated around: you allegedly began writing dream journals and hiding them in incense boxes. Some believe they were coded messages to the emperor. Others thought they were spells. Whether true or not, the idea that you might be using mystical tools only increased your mystique and made you more dangerous. Cheng Yue hears the whispers, and instead of distancing himself, he draws even closer. On your birthday, he gives you a robe embroidered with golden lotuses, symbols of purity, rebirth, and resistance. The Empress sends a lukewarm note. You keep both. But it's clear, the palace is now a chessboard with you and Wu on opposite ends, and every pawn in between has chosen a side. One night, after a banquet, the Emperor asks you what you want most. You say nothing. Smile. He presses. You say peace. He frowns. That's not what he expected. He was ready to grant you lands, titles, a palace in the south. Instead, you ask for silence, for a day without eyes on your every step. He laughs, not mockingly, just sadly, because even he knows you'll never get that. Not while you're still breathing. Not while you matter this much. You wake to the sound of silk rustling, too soft to be urgent, too deliberate to be casual. One of your handmaids has slipped in to light the incense, but the scent tonight is different. Sharper, less floral, more medicinal. You note it. Tuck the thought away. The palace teaches you this. Nothing is random, and paranoia is just self-preservation dressed in etiquette. You sit up slowly, feeling the familiar weight of being watched, even in the sanctity of your chambers, outside your private doors. Guards shift with the stiffness of men who know their mistress is both favored and hunted. And tonight, you're already feeling the blood warm in your palms, because today marks a year since your son died. No rituals are scheduled, no memorial offerings requested. The emperor mourns in silence. You mourn in survival, but beneath that silence, the palace is buzzing. You've heard whispers something's coming. It's not uncommon. Even in peace, the forbidden city simmers. But this time, it's louder. You're being mentioned again in places you shouldn't be. Not the women's quarters, not the gardens, but in the offices where state documents are unrolled like snakes across lacquered tables, where old men in black robes debate your very existence like a policy problem. Your name is now an imperial liability, because now they're saying it out loud. Maybe it's time the emperor took another consort more seriously, one with better family ties. Maybe the empress should reassert her place. Maybe you've had enough influence for one lifetime, and then unexpectedly he acts. Not against you, against them, in a move that makes the whole palace stagger. The emperor issues a title not seen before. He elevates you to the status of imperial noble consort, a rank that technically doesn't outrank the empress, but socially, politically, it might as well be empress to point zero. The scroll is read out in court, and no one breathes. Because this is more than favoritism, this is him changing the rules mid-game. Traditionally, such a title might be given to an older, retired consort, or someone with a child on the throne. You're neither, but you're still here, still standing, still central to his day. And now you have a title that makes it official. Historians still argue whether the creation of that title was a calculated political maneuver, or an impulsive gesture of love. Was he protecting you from the vultures, or simply marking territory? Some suggest it was a compromise between naming you empress and doing nothing to bone throne to the scholars, wrapped in silk. Others believe it was an emotional decision born out of loss, guilt, and obsession. What's certain is that it didn't calm things. It poured honey on a nest of hornets. The empress, Wu, reportedly spent the next 3 days in spiritual retreat. When she emerged, she was colder than frost. No confrontation, no direct action, just a tightening of her faction, a quiet war of paper and protocol. She began appearing more often in public ceremonies, sent handmaids bearing gifts to distant relatives in government. She turned every move into a message. She was still empress, and she wasn't going anywhere. You, meanwhile, adjusted to your new reality. The elevation came with perks, a larger staff, expanded quarters, access to restricted areas, but also more eyes, more politics. You began meeting with the emperor more regularly in the Hall of Mental Cultivation, where he supposedly conducted state affairs, except now, those affairs were frequently delayed, rescheduled, or filtered through eunuchs. Because if he had to choose between a budget meeting and your opinion on a new inkstone design, well, the inkstone usually won. Not everyone appreciated that. The Council of Rights submitted a formal protest, veiled in metaphor, comparing the court to a chariot being driven by its own passenger. The emperor ignored it, but the pressure wasn't just external. Some began turning their suspicions inward. Your own attendants became quieter. One left without explanation, and you later heard she'd been found with coded letters. Whether she was a spy or a scapegoat, you never found out. You didn't ask. You couldn't afford to. Trust was now a luxury you couldn't wear, not even beneath your hairpins. So you did what you always did. You adapted. You stopped walking in the garden. You requested fewer public events. You leaned into invisibility, paradoxically gaining more influence by seeming to want less. That was your real talent, not seduction, not politics, but invisibility. The ability to blur just enough that people underestimated your presence, then realized too late you'd reshape the room around them. One fringe detail that lingers in later scrolls possibly invented, possibly true, is that you started growing miniature bonsai trees in your quarters, that you clipped them yourself carefully every morning, while listening to court gossip filtered through your most trusted handmaid. Some say the emperor watched you once, silently, as you trimmed a tiny pine tree for an hour, and later said it was the most peaceful moment he'd had in months. Whether he meant the tree or the silence, no one knows. Still, not everyone feared you. Some were fascinated. You became a kind of palace legend, this woman of no noble blood, no surviving child, who rose purely by presence. Young concubines began imitating your fashion, speaking with a Suzhou accent. One even changed her name to Wan in an act of flattery so blatant it made the emperor roll his eyes. The palace gossips began calling you the woman who outranked the empress, though never to your face. You smiled when you heard it, then filed it away with all the other things you couldn't afford to react to. You don't sleep through the night anymore, not because of nightmares those come in the afternoon, masked as court gossip, but because each hour holds its own flavor of danger. At midnight, it's silence that presses in. At 2, it's the sound of feet not supposed to be there. At 4, it's your own heartbeat, ticking like a drum beneath a silk robe. You've learned to sleep like a dear one attuned to treachery, one hand curled near the pillow, where you keep a small jade token engraved with your son's name, a reminder, a shield, a wound. The palace is quieter now, but not safer. It's the quiet of poised claws, of rehearsed politeness concealing venom. Then it happens. The rumor, the kind that slithers through corridors and into dreams, that the empress is behind your child's death. No names attached, no proof offered, But the suggestion alone is a spark in a room soaked in oil. You hear it first from a junior maid who shouldn't know such things. Her eyes are wide. Her voice, calm. You don't react. But that night, you order all incense jars sealed, all gifts re-inspected, and your pillows checked for the telltale bitter scent of arsenic just in case. Because you know better than to underestimate whispers. That's how revolutions start. And also how women vanish. You don't confront the Empress. That would be pointless. She'd deny it, look wounded, cite her own miscarriages as shared grief, and even if she was guilty, she was protected by her title, untouchable. So instead, you do something far more dangerous. You survive not, and that survival, paradoxically, makes you more powerful. The Emperor sees your composure, your restraint. He praises it, begins speaking of you in metaphors, calling you a calm moon in a stormy sky, a pine tree in winter. His affections are becoming poetry, which means he's slipping deeper into the kind of love that forgets the rest of the world exists. And that's a problem, not just for you but for him. Historians still debate whether Cheng Hua was aware of the full extent of palace politics or simply chose not to care. Was he a man blinded by affection, or a ruler who gambled everything on the one person who made him feel human? Either way, his favoritism deepens, and with that, the court begins. To act out first, they go after your allies. A trusted eunuch is reassigned to the outer provinces. A chamberlain close to you is accused of falsifying records and quietly disappears. Nothing is ever said directly about you, but the pattern is clear. Weaken her web, and she will fall. Except, you don't, because you've anticipated this. You've left no letters, no paper trail. Your influence is carried in looks, in the way the emperor hesitates before signing a decree until you nod. That can't be documented, and so it can't be punished. Then comes the next blow. Your name is removed from a list of ceremonial participants for the spring rite. A small thing, officially a clerical error, but you know better. It's a test, a warning, a probe to see how you'll respond. So you don't. You send a thank you note to the ceremony organizer for lightening your burdens during a difficult season. The court reads it and doesn't know whether to laugh or shiver. That's your style satin sarcasm with a kiss of sugar, and it works but then, something worse. Your son Jiaoqing, once declared heir before his death, is suddenly the center of a revisionist debate. A scholar proposes that the boy was never officially designated as crown prince, that the records were ambiguous. It's a clear attempt to erase not just your motherhood, but your legacy. The emperor is furious. He bans the scholar from court, but the seed has been planted. The debate spreads. Was the child ever real? Was the elevation of Lady Wan even justified? The kind of questions that bleed through time, staining your memory. You, however, remain composed. You begin hosting poetry salons again, small ones, quiet. You quote obscure Confucian texts about memory and mourning. You don't need funds to restore. A shrine dedicated to mothers who lost children, not big moves, symbolic ones, just enough to keep your son's name alive without sparking another scandal. One detail that becomes a favorite among fringe historians is that you start wearing hairpins, shaped like phoenix feathers. Not the whole phoenix, just fragments, broken, but unmistakable. A visual metaphor even the dullest eunuch understands. Meanwhile, the emperor grows more erratic. His decisions wobble between brilliant and bizarre. He promotes a painter to a ministerial post, citing the need for beauty and governance. He cancels a war drill because he's in a reflective mood. The court blames you, of course, says you're filling his head with poetry and perfume, that he's lost to the concubine's fog. You smile, because yes, he's in a fog, but you didn't make it. The world did. You're just the only clarity he has left. And so your status morphs into something almost mythical. You are no longer just a woman. You are a symbol of indulgence, of rebellion, of the emperor's weakness or his passion. The line blurs. Eunuchs begin avoiding eye contact when they speak to you. Ministers lower their voices when you're seated beneath a canopy of embroidered stars, fake constellations stitched in gold across deep indigo silk. When the empress makes her first real move, not through daggers or poison. No, this is the Ming court, where destruction arrives. In folded paper and incense ash. One morning, an official scroll is read aloud during the emperor's council session, composed by the empress herself, cloaked in humility but soaked in venom. It's a request, she says, for clarity of roles, for harmony among the inner court, and the need to reaffirm traditional structures so that His Majesty may rule undistracted. She never names you. She doesn't have to. Every line drips with the implication that you've overstepped, that a concubine, even a titled one, must not distract the dragon from his skyward flight. The council listens. Some nod, others glance nervously at the emperor, who receives the petition in stony silence, his fingers tapping the lacquered armrest like he's counting the seconds. It takes for his patience to evaporate. Later, when he visits you that evening, his mood is sour, but not as you. He vents, mutters about how rituals have become cages, how Confucians fear passion more than plague. You don't interrupt. You never do when he's like this. Instead, you pour wine. You lean your head against his shoulder, and when he falls asleep, you sit quietly beside him, watching the candlelight flicker across a face more worn than it should be. You know this is dangerous. You're not stupid. Every favor from him is a weight on your chest. But you also know that love, if that's what this is your only real protection. The moment he doubts you, you're done, and not in the poetic, heartbroken sense. In the accidental fall down palace stair sense. That's how it works here. So when the Empress ramps up her efforts, you're ready. She starts by surrounding herself with scholars and dowagers. She hosts small poetry gatherings of her own, filled with symbolism and virtue-signaling verses. Her guests always leave with little scrolls quoting the Analects and emphasizing female restraint. Subtle digs, embroidered insults. You hear about one particular poem passed around during one of her gatherings. That ends with, the shadow that outshines the tree is soon cut down. Elegant, ominous, predictable. You don't respond, not directly. But that month, you host a musical performance featuring a piece titled The Unseen Lotus. Critics call it haunting, poignant, a thinly veiled flex, absolutely. Historians still argue whether these indirect battles were even noticed by the emperor, or if he simply ignored them to avoid choosing sides. Some suggest he saw the feud as petty, beneath him. Others believe he secretly enjoyed watching the powerhouses circle each other like tigers in the same cage. What's not up for debate is that the court begins splitting. Some lean toward the Empress, citing order and ritual. Others quietly admire your resilience, your elegance under pressure. You've never had a faction of your own before. Now, you do. Small, loyal, smart enough not to speak your name too loudly, but present. Then comes the real blow. The Empress petitions for her niece, barely 16, docile as a teacup, to be promoted to secondary consort, with rooms located alarmingly close to the Emperor's private chambers. Officially, this is to balance the inner court and encourage dynastic stability. Unofficially, it's a direct challenge, a fresh contender. Youth versus experience, sugar versus steel. The Emperor hesitates. You can see it in his eyes when he tells you over tea, trying to soften it. He doesn't want this. But saying no outright risks upsetting the court, destabilizing things further. You listen, not slowly, sip your tea. And later that night, when he kisses your hand and calls you my storm shelter, you smile, because you already know what you'll do. You send the new girl a gift, a comb of carved bone, beautiful and delicate. You attach a short note. May your mornings be calm, and your evenings even calmer. It becomes the talk of the palace for a week. Was it kind? Was it a warning? Was it both? The girl, for her part, never causes trouble. She stays quiet. Too quiet. You suspect she's being coached by the Empress's circle. Doesn't matter. You remain ahead. And you don't stop there. You begin a new strategy one no one expects. You start speaking more frequently with palace scholars. Not about politics, about literature, about governance philosophy. You host weekly reading salons. You quote Confucius and Mencius, but twist their words gently to suggest a broader role. For women not in power, of course, but in moral guidance. The scholars laugh, then pause, because what you say isn't wrong, just inconvenient. You're rewriting the narrative not as a temptress or manipulator, but as a cultural steward, a refined influence, a whisperer of virtue dressed in gauze and jade. And then, perhaps your boldest move yet, you suggest an imperial edict be issued honoring the women of the court for their roles in maintaining harmony during turbulent times. It's symbolic, completely useless on paper, but the Empress's name is missing from the first draft. Not an accident. When she protests, the correction is issued after a very public delay. You watch as the court begins treating you not as a concubine, but as something else. Not Empress, not quite, but close enough to make everyone uncomfortable. You can feel the air shifting again, heavier this time, as if the palace itself is exhaling suspicion with every breeze. The rivalry between you and the Empress has moved past veiled poems, and protocol snubs now is leaking into the whispers. Between pillars, into the way court ladies glance sideways when you pass. They're watching for your fall, or maybe just waiting to see how high you'll fly before the inevitable crash. But you've learned how to float just low enough to dodge arrows, while still casting a shadow. What no one talks about openly is the rising number of strange incidents, trinkets going missing, meals arriving slightly cooler than they should, a musician you trust suddenly reassigned to a distant outpost without warning, and once, disturbingly, your favorite robe returned from the wash with a faint powdery residue on the hem to pale to. Notice unless you knew to look, you know better than to panic. Instead, you order an increase in candle count. More light means fewer places to hide. Inside your chambers, the atmosphere transforms. You become stricter, more precise. Your cosmetics are applied only by handmaids who've been with you for years. Your food is tasted in front of you. You start keeping records not on paper, but in memory, and in quiet code stitched into your pillow seams. Even your incense. Blends change. You abandon the soft peony scents in favor of sharper sandalwood and agarwood scents that pierce, rather than soothe. And all the while, you keep smiling. That's your greatest weapon. The kind of smile that says, I see you. Even if your eyes never leave your cup, but you're not alone in feeling the chill. The Emperor is starting to change. Not in his affection, he still visits, still asks about your dreams, still hums that song you once sang in Suzhou, but in his manner. He's more distracted, less grounded. The court has begun pushing harder. Advisors are flooding his desk, with petitions urging him to secure succession, to name a new heir, to remarry in spirit, if not in ceremony. Their logic is sound. The dynasty needs stability, and you, regardless of how beloved, are not a solution. You're the past. Romantic, tragic, while sterile in political terms. He resists, but resistance takes a toll. You see it in his posture, in how often he sighs mid-sentence, as if ruling an empire is something he no longer wants, but can't hand off without guilt. That's when the palace begins to weaponize superstition. It starts small, a jade figurine found cracked in the temple, a scribed eyes unexpectedly after handling documents in your quarters, a concubine barely known, barely noticed faints during a ritual and wakes babbling about voices in the silk. Soon, rumors flood in, whispers that you practice spirit magic, that you consult with mediums, that you keep talismans hidden in your wardrobe. None of it is proven, none of it needs to be. Fear doesn't require evidence, just imagination and repetition. You remember one particular incident. A servant girl burst into your room in the dead of night, trembling, claiming she saw a ghostly figure outside your window. She insisted called your name. You calm her down, send her away, and then spend the next hour checking the perimeter with a lamp in hand. You find nothing, but you sleep even less that night, because you know what this is. It's not ghosts, it's not curses, it's palace theater. Someone's planting seeds, and unfortunately, a haunted woman is easier to expel than a favored one. Historians still debate whether the ghost rumors were orchestrated by the Empress's allies, or arose organically from years of pent-up anxiety. The Forbidden City has always been a pressure cooker of belief systems, Confucianism above the surface, but Taoist charms, folk spells, and Buddhist prayers woven through every crack in the stone. And a woman who rose afar, who was loved to loudly, was the perfect vessel for people's unease. Some even began suggesting your child's death was retribution from heaven, that your influence was unbalancing the Emperor's heavenly mandate. You know this. You feel it pressing against your skin like humidity before a storm. So you adjust. Again, you begin making more public offerings. You visit temples. You host a lecture on filial piety, inviting a few respected monks. You change your wardrobe less flamboyant, more refined. No more phoenix feathers, just bamboo motifs and willow trees, soft symbols of humility. You even sponsor a ritual reading of morning texts for all mothers who've lost children in the palace, not just yourself. It's a careful campaign. One part damage control, the parts moral judo da, and still, the pressure builds. One night, the Emperor arrives unusually late. He's disheveled, his hair hastily tied, his tone clipped. You ask, what's wrong? He waves it off. But then, as he's pouring wine, he asks you casually, like it's a passing thought if you've been consulting with any spiritual advisors. Your heart slows. You keep your voice light. Just monks, you say. They read sutras for. My son, for peace. He nods, says nothing, but you can feel it, the doubt, not in your loyalty, not in your heart, but in how others perceive you, and that, in this place, is enough to destroy everything. One fringe rumor from this period that somehow survived the centuries claims you kept a mirror facing east in your room, and every morning you whispered a name into it. Some say it was your son's name. Others claim it was the name of the Empress. Still others say it was your own, as a way of anchoring yourself against being erased. No records confirm this, but the mirror, that part's real. It's listed in an inventory taken after your death, bronze-backed, slightly warped, a detail that somehow feels too poetic not to be true. By now, you're no longer simply the Emperor's favorite. You're something more complicated, a figure half wrapped in myth, stitched with fear, and cloaked in perfume. You walk a line between power and peril, and every step echoes louder than the last. The Empress still holds her rank, the court still pretends everything is balanced. But you know better. The silk has torn, the threads are visible, and the palace is not waiting for your fall. It's preparing for it. You don't flinch anymore when a dish is late, or when the bells sound at an odd interval. Fear, once your constant companion, has been downgraded to a house guest still present, still intrusive, but no longer in control. You've learned to function within it, like a bird that nests in the mouth of a lion because, well, that's just where the warm air is. And tonight, as you sit beneath a hanging lantern made of fish skin, and bone is light soft, flickering like a secret, you catch wind of the third assassination attempt. Not a dramatic sword in the night kind of deal. That's not how things are done here. This one is quieter. A tea tray, set down just a touch too gently. A maid who suddenly can't meet your eyes. You don't drink. Instead, you ask the girl to try the tea herself. She hesitates. That's all you need. You nod, and she's taken away. You'll never see her again. No need to ask where she goes. You already know the name of the pit they use. This is your life now. Survival. Not in a blaze of glory, but in the tedious daily grind of vigilance. Every hairpin might be a message. Every meal, a gamble. The palace is less a home than a high-stakes escape room with embroidered curtains. Your days begin with coded glances and end with rehearsed silences. And the Emperor, he's still devoted, but his presence is becoming a liability. The more time he spends with you, the more noise it generates. The court resents your influence. The scholars whisper about imbalance. Ritual officials draft petitions using metaphors about the Emperor's loss of celestial direction. And still, he comes. He eats in your chambers. He leans on your advice. Not always about statecraft, but about people who can be trusted, who says one thing but means another. You become more than a consort. You're a mirror he trusts. That, more than anything, is what terrifies them. So you retreat not in shame, but in strategy. You start turning down invitations. You claim minor illnesses. You let others be. Seen more. It's not about fading. It's about pacing. You know that in this palace, visibility is a fire. Too close, you burn. Too far, you're forgotten. But just right, you warm the room. So you adjust. And in the space you leave behind, the court scurries. Concubines rise in temporary favor. Ministers jockey for influence. The Empress reclaims her ceremonial spotlight. Let them. You are not playing their game anymore. You're playing yours. One day, you receive a peculiar gift. A scroll of Buddhist parables, beautifully illustrated, unsigned. You know it's from the Emperor. It's his way of telling you he's aware of the pressure, that he wants you to stay still, to be safe. The scroll contains a story about a crane who survives a fire by standing motionless in the reeds. A quiet parable, a loud message. You understand. You do. But the palace isn't done testing you. That spring, a new regulation is passed concerning the ranks and movements of imperial consorts. On paper, it's nothing, a procedural adjustment. In practice, it limits your access to several court spaces you once navigated freely. You don't protest. You send a thank you note for clarifying boundaries. It's so gracious, so icy, that the Empress reportedly tears hers in half. You don't smile when you hear it, but you allow yourself one extra piece of candied plum that evening. You've earned it. Historians still debate how much of this dance was scripted by you, and how much was instinct. Were you a strategist, adjusting pieces on a hidden board, or just an intuitive survivor responding with grace under pressure? The truth is probably both, because at this point, your legend is writing itself. You're no longer just Lady Wan, the Emperor's favorite. You're a phenomenon. There's a saying among the eunuchs, to serve tea to Lady Wan is to hold a dragon by the tail. It's not a compliment. It's a warning, and yet, they still queue up to be near you. Your chambers become quieter, but no less significant. You begin keeping turtles, quiet creatures, ancient symbols of longevity. You're drawn to them, the way they move slowly, purposefully, how they carry their homes with them. It feels poetic. You even name one after a famous poet who once wrote about love surviving exile. A fringe record claims you wrote your own poetry during this time. Short, minimalist verses about moss, moonlight, and mirrors. None of it survives, but people still swear they saw you scribbling on scraps of rice paper and tucking them under your mattress. Maybe you did. Maybe it was your way of speaking in a world that no longer welcomed your voice out loud. And through all this, the Emperor keeps coming, more subdued now, older. The stress is catching up to him. You see it in his temples, the way he walks more slowly, the way he lingers in your quarters like he's trying to freeze time. Sometimes he talks about stepping away, not abdication, he wouldn't dare say it aloud, but a retreat. A long trip south, just the two of you, away from politics and ghosts. You nod when he says these things. You don't believe them, but you let him dream. That's your job now, to dot. Then one night, he falls asleep mid-sentence, head on your lap, murmuring about a lake he once saw as a child, and you stroke his hair. Not because you love him, not in the way novels say, but because he's the only thing between you and the abyss. You don't trust him, but you need him, and maybe that's more honest than love ever was. There's a peculiar irony to it all, how the more the Emperor tries to shield you, the more he exposes you. Every decree he pens with your comfort in mind becomes another arrow in your back, fired from the bows of tradition and Confucian outrage. One winter morning, he issues a new policy, one that sounds, on the surface, harmless. It restricts high-level court officials from entering the inner palace grounds, unless explicitly summoned. A practical security measure, perhaps, but the whispers say otherwise. That is meant to limit who can see you, who can monitor your interactions, who can interfere, and just like that, your name is back in every hallway, folded into hushed tones and bitter analogies. They don't even bother hiding it anymore. The Empress's faction begins referring to you with nicknames: the Mirror Lady, the Whisper Wife, she who sits too near, not openly, but enough that the courtiers know the script. You're being painted not as a villain, but as a sickness, and a society built on harmony. Imbalance is the ultimate sin. But Changhua, he doubles down. Not only does he ignore the criticism, he reinforces his decisions. You're now given personal eunuchs with rank usually reserved for nobility. Your quarters are expanded. You're allowed to keep rare books previously locked away in the imperial archives. Books even the Empress wouldn't touch without 3 permissions and a ritual bath. One of them includes essays on governance written by women scholars banned during earlier reigns. For being morally confusing, you read them anyway. You don't share your thoughts. You don't need to. The fact that you read them is message enough. Power isn't always a throne. Sometimes it's a footnote no one else is allowed to read. This, of course, sparks a full-on court panic. Officials start filing reports like it's a clearance sale on outrage. They claim the Emperor is spending too much time indoors, that he's ignoring petitions, that the weight of the realm is being dragged down by matters of the flesh and heart. One brave and possibly foolish minister even accuses you by name in a letter, implying your presence has spiritually diluted the divine essence of rulership. That's a fancy way of saying he's into her to think straight. The Emperor responds by promoting your brother to a cushy post in Suzhou, and gifting your father a ceremonial robe embroidered with crane symbols of status, longevity, and subtle sarcasm. Historians still argue whether this phase of your influence was love-motivated or driven by desperation. Did Changhua genuinely believe you brought him peace? Or did he cling to you because the rest of the empire was slipping through his fingers like sand through brocade? What's certain is that you become a policy unto yourself. He begins referencing you in his decision-making, saying things like, Lady Wan believes it calms the people. Or she reminds me that poetry fosters loyalty. You're not just the muse, you're the filter. Everything he sees now is colored by your presence. That's power. Not the kind you crown, the kind you inhale. One fringe event around this time is worth mentioning. It's said that during an eclipse, while the entire court fasted and performed rituals, you stayed in your quarters with the curtains drawn, not in defiance, but in what you described later as quiet respect. The emperor, of course, stayed with you. He didn't appear. At the ceremonies, the scholars were livid. They declared the eclipse a divine rebuke, a heavenly protest against your corruption of the throne. But nothing came of it, because what were they going to do rest the moon still? You know this can't last. Power that isn't codified is always temporary. You have no official path forward. You're not the empress. You're not a regent. You don't have a son to anchor your legacy. All you have is presence, and presence, like perfume, fades without reapplication. So you begin to prepare, not for war but for permanence. You suggest to the emperor that your status should be clarified for posterity, a new title, perhaps, one that formally places you above the other consorts, but beneath the empress. He nods. He agrees, and just like that, he invents one, consort dowager, a title that never existed before, one that outranks the empress in practical terms, but avoids the political catastrophe of replacing her. The court is thrown into chaos. No one knows how to respond. Some accuse the emperor of rewriting history for love. Others call it a masterstroke appeasing his heart without triggering a coup. The empress, for her part, retreats, not physically, but emotionally. She stops hosting gatherings, stops sending scrolls. She becomes a ghost in embroidered shoes. Whether it's a strategic withdrawal or emotional surrender, you don't know, but it makes things quieter, and quieter, you've learned, doesn't mean safer, just more deceptive. Your days change. You're now consulted for more than companionship. The emperor begins asking you to review letters, poems, edicts. Not for content, he has scholars for that, but for tone. You become a kind of imperial conscience, a tastemaker for governance. Ministers resent it, but they also admire it. Few even start copying your style. Shorter sentences, more imagery, less rigidity. You've infected the empire not through orders, but aesthetics. That's influence no sword can slice. And still, you sleep lightly. You watch the moon through slatted windows. You write verses you never sign. You play music for an emperor who's aging faster than he admits. Some nights, he falls asleep with your name on his lips. Other nights, he's too tired to speak. You sit beside him anyway. Because for all the poetry and politics, for all the robes and rumors, this is still the truth. You are a woman who survived the impossible. By making herself indispensable, you didn't marry power. You became the reason it made sense to someone. And that, in the Forbidden City, is more dangerous than ambition ever was. It's early morning when the new title becomes official. No trumpets, no silk scroll ceremony. Just a quietly delivered decree, marked with the emperor's seal and tucked into the records of the inner court. You are now Consort Dowager Wang, a name that makes the scribes pause, because it doesn't fit any known category. Dowager implies age, retirement, the mother of a reigning emperor. But you are none of those things. You are alive, present, and still sharing meals with the Son of Heaven. This is not a promotion. It's an invention, a workaround, a silent thunderclap in embroidered shoes. And the court knows exactly what it means. You now outrank the empress in practice, if not in principle. You walk through the palace with a new layer of silk over your shoulders, not for warmth, but to muffle the shockwaves you leave in your wake. Guards bow lower. Eunuchs speak more carefully. Ministers trip over their greetings, trying to balance tradition with fear. You don't speak about it. You don't gloat. You don't need to. But the palace is now divided more starkly than ever. There are those who accept this new order, those who've quietly shifted allegiances, adopted your tastes, echoed your phrases in meetings, and then there are the others, the empress's remnants, the conservatives, the Confucian purists who see your title not just as a threat, but as an existential rupture. For them, you are proof that emotion has overtaken ritual, that the inner court now directs the outer. They begin meeting in secret, drafting memorials, not to challenge you. Directly, no one dares but to criticize the erosion of hierarchy, the fragile state of celestial balance. It's an elegant way of calling you a problem, without using your name. The emperor reads these memorials. Sometimes he laughs, sometimes he sighs. Once, he burns one with a hairpin taken from your dressing table. You watch the ashes curl and fall. You don't say anything, because even you know this is a dangerous kind of loyalty, the kind that can't be explained in council, but can shatter kingdoms from within. He trusts you too much, loves you divisibly, and everyone else is just counting the days. You begin to notice changes in him, subtle at first. He forgets names more often. He skips meetings. He wakes in the night, confused, asking for a servant who's been dead for years. Once, he accuses his own physician of betrayal, then forgets the outburst moments later. You try to intervene. Quietly, you speak with his chamberlain, suggest more rest, less wine, a change in herbs, but nothing changes, because the problem isn't physical, it's rot, not in his body, but in the structure around him. The empire is growing tired. He's grown tired with it. And through it all, you remain by his side, not because you're naive. You know the fall is coming, maybe not yours, maybe not yet, but his. That's inevitable. And when he falls, your position, your invented title, your influence will vanish with him like dew on jade. So you begin preparing. You arrange for repairs to your family's estate in Suzhou. You draft letters to relatives you haven't spoken to in years. You start sleeping with your traveling bag packed, just in case. Historians still debate whether your preparations were out of fear or strategy. Were you simply bracing for the worst, or did you have a plan to survive it? Fringe theories suggest you were quietly gathering leveraged gifts from the emperor, documents, promises. One even claims you had a coded journal, hidden in a carved ink stone, documenting who in the court supported you and who didn't. The truth, likely somewhere in the middle. You were no fool. You knew what palace survival meant. You knew how quickly silk can turn into shackles. The empress, strangely, grows quieter during this time. She reappears in ceremonies, but her smile is brittle, her voice hollow. You almost feel sorry for her, almost. But she's still dangerous. She has her name, her lineage, her ceremonial duties. And when the emperor dies, because of course he will, she will have something you don't. Legal, standing, widowhood. In this court is a crown you wear in blood. You'll be a memory, however revered, but one with no anchor. But that's for later. For now, you still hold the candle, still sit beside the throne, still bear the weight of a title that no one understands but everyone fears. You notice a change in how people look at you now, not just as a concubine or a power figure, but as an oracle of instability. You represent what happens when the system bends too far to accommodate affection. You are not the storm, you are the eye of it, the stillness that signals how bad it's become. You don't protest, you don't apologize, but you start withdrawing, not out of fear, out of preservation. You attend fewer gatherings, you speak less in council, you begin deflecting attention to others, subtly raising the profiles of less threatening women in the court. You know this is necessary. You must fade without vanishing, remain present, but non-threatening, a petal, not a blade. And so, even as your official status peaks, you begin the quiet descent, not a fall, a glide, a tactical retreat, because you've read enough scrolls to know how stories like yours usually end, and you intend to outlive this one. You wake before sunrise, long before the bells, and for the first time in years, the silence feels unfamiliar, not dangerous, just foreign. The emperor didn't visit last night. No message, no explanation, not the first time, but something about. The absence feels heavier, stretched thin like silk left along in the sun. You light your own incense this time out of habit, out of superstition, or maybe just to have something to do with your hands. The smell curls upward, woody and bitter, and you watch it for a full minute before moving. You know the pattern. The body always knows before the mind admits it. Something's shifting again, a slow, irrevocable tilt, and you, the palace's best listener, have caught the tone change before the orchestra announces it. When he does arrive 2 nights later, it's like watching a man walk through water. Slow, distant, quiet in the wrong places. He smiles, but is thinner than usual, asks about your turtles, doesn't touch his wine. And when you read him a passage from a text you know he loves, he doesn't finish the quote. He just stares at the wall like it's answering a question you weren't allowed to hear. You want to ask him what's wrong, but you don't, because you already know. It's time, not for the drama, not yet, but for the slow disintegration of a man who's held on too long to too many contradictions. The court, of course, notices. First, ministers are summoned less, rituals are delayed. At once, shockingly, a foreign envoy is turned away with an apology and a scroll bearing your handwriting. The emperor had been indisposed, and you had been entrusted to convey his regrets. That never happened before. A concubine, now consort dowager, writing on behalf of the Son of Heaven. It's not just unconventional, it's sacrilege, but no one protests, because no one wants to admit what it means, that the emperor is slipping, and the woman he built his world around might soon be the only thread left holding it all together. You take no pleasure in it, just exhaustion, the kind that sits in your bones and sighs when you breathe. Your days are quieter, fewer visits, fewer letters. You begin spending hours alone, rereading old poems, sketching turtles and garden paths on scraps of silk. Sometimes you imagine leaving, not in shame, not in fear, just walking out one day, dressed plainly, without a title, without guards, back to Suzhou, maybe, or somewhere with more sky and fewer rules. But that's not how this works. You are not allowed to return to the world. The world has already forgotten how to fit you in a dot, so you remain, and when the emperor falls ill, it's almost a relief, not because you wish him harm, never that, but because it confirms what you've been living with quietly for months. The end is near. The physicians call it a fever, an imbalance of the elements. They prescribe herbs, acupuncture, prayers, but nothing works. He grows thinner, more irritable. He stops asking for scrolls, starts sleeping in the day, dreams out loud in the night, names of people long dead pass his lips. He doesn't ask for the empress, not once. He asks for you, and you come, every time. You sit beside him, mop his brow, read old letters aloud, sing softly even when your voice cracks. You are the last thing he wants to see, and you know it. Not because you are his greatest love, though perhaps you are, but because you are the only person left who remembers all the parts of him he tried to keep. You saw the emperor and the man, and you didn't run. That matters more than all the rituals in the world. But the court waits like wolves, not circling, just sitting, watching, because they know what comes next. Power, once unmoored from a body, must reattach itself somewhere else. And when the emperor dies, because everyone knows he will, it won't matter what he wrote, what titles he invented, what scrolls he kissed into law. You'll be alone, exposed, a beloved relic of a past regime, and relics, as history often shows, don't tend to survive renovations. Historians still argue about this period. Was the emperor's final illness natural? Or was it nudged along by men desperate to reset the game board? One fringe theory suggests his wine was slowly laced with powdered herbs that weakened the spirit over time. Another claims he was poisoned by stress, the slow erosion of loyalty around him. No autopsy was done, no inquiry launched, because no one wanted to know. What mattered wasn't how he died, it was who would stand next to his memory. And you knew better than to fight. You didn't plead, didn't position yourself, you just stayed, until the last night, when he asked for one final thing, not a poem, not a song, just your hand. You gave it. He held it, briefly, then released it, fingers curling like silk folding into itself. When he stopped breathing, the palace didn't cry. It exhaled, like a storm had passed, and now it was time to clean up the wreckage. You weren't summoned to the morning rites. The empress resumed her position. Draped in ceremonial black, stoic as tradition demanded, courtiers began reshuffling their loyalties. Some bowed deeper to you, others avoided your gaze altogether. You knew what was coming, and you were ready, because you hadn't survived this long by clinging to illusions. You weren't the emperor's widow. You were the emperor's memory, and in this place, memory is as sharp as any blade. The emperor's body lies in the hall of imperial clarity for 3 days, before being moved to the ancestral mausoleum, wrapped in silk, surrounded by incense coils that burn like 100 tiny suns. You're not invited to the formal mourning procession. You expected that. Your name isn't spoken during the eulogies, though one court historian sneaks in a reference to the favored moon of his later years. It's a veiled nod, a whisper inside the shout of ritual. You don't need more. The real tribute isn't in the ceremonies. It's in the absence, in the way everyone keeps looking over their shoulder, waiting for you to appear, and you don't, because you understand optics. You understand timing. You understand that right now, presence is power, but absence is strategy. Instead, you stay in your quarters, draped in mourning white. You observe the proper rites. You light incense at dawn and dusk. You release a single turtle into the ornamental pond, whispering your thanks before it vanishes beneath the reflection of the palace roof. You don't cry, not because you're unfeeling, but because tears are for those who still have someone to answer them. You sit quietly while the new emperor, Zhu Yaotangchenghua's teenage son by another consort is officially enthroned. He's smart, careful, raised by people who saw what happened to his half-brother and swore never to let it repeat. His ascension is smooth, controlled, and already you can feel your influence being measured, calculated, categorized. You're no threat to him. You made sure of that. Still, he keeps his distance. The Empress, now Empress Dowager, returns to court life like a winter wine, predictable, cold, and just slightly bitter. She doesn't speak your name. She doesn't need to. Her faction moves fast. You're removed from certain records. Your visits to key halls are postponed indefinitely. Some of your eunuchs are reassigned, not punished, just redistributed. Like books the library no longer needs in public view. You accept it. You knew this was coming. You spend your days now writing letters you don't send, rearranging your bonsai trees, reading through books you've already memorized. This isn't exile, not technically, but it's close enough that no one bothers to correct the term when it slips into conversation. Yet, despite everything, you're not alone. People still visit quietly, respectfully. A few ministers stop by, officially to pay respects, unofficially to read the temperature of your quarters. They speak carefully, mention politics only in abstract. You reply in poetry, not vague enough to be useless, but never so direct that it can be used against you. You become a symbol now, a parable, proof that love can challenge tradition. Even if tradition eventually wins, there's a certain prestige in that. The young women of the court still study your style, your way of walking, of sitting, of pouring tea as if it were a diplomatic act. You're not a ghost yet. You're a watermark. But the court isn't done with you. Not completely. There's still one more move. A petition is submitted anonymously, of course suggesting that your title of consort dowager be retired, to prevent confusion among future generations. It doesn't accuse you of anything. It just argues for historical clarity. You laugh when you hear it, not because it's funny, but because it's exactly the kind of erasure you always expected. You're not offended. You're impressed. It's elegant, efficient, and doomed to fail. Because the emperor, your emperor, wrote your name too many times, in too many places, on edicts, on poetry scrolls, in margins, in the hearts of those who watched him skip ceremonies just to hear you sing. Still, the petition gains support. Quietly, the court begins drafting an alternative title for you, something softer, more ambiguous. Lady of Tranquil Light, perhaps, something that suggests you are peaceful, forgettable, non-threatening. You don't argue. You send no letters. You make no appeal. Instead, you write a new poem, 6 lines, about a crane who lives long enough to watch her own statue get covered in moss. You give it to one of your handmaids. Within days, copies appear in the market stalls outside the palace. No one knows where it came from. Everyone knows who wrote it. Historians still debate the political role of your poetry. Some say you used it to shape court opinion, subtly guiding culture like a hidden hand. Others claim you simply wrote to stay sane, that it was the one place no one could censor you. One French scholar even suggested you embedded secret critiques into the structure of your verses, using rhyme and rhythm as code. That's probably nonsense. But the fact that people believe it, that's legacy. Meanwhile, the new emperor grows into his role. He avoids scandals, follows ritual, respects his mother, the Empress Dowager, in public. But every now and then, you hear that he still keeps your scrolls in his private study, not out of affection, out of caution. He knows what you were, what you are, a case study in influence, a ghost of power wrapped in perfume and patience. And you stay out of the way. You tend your trees. You watch the sky shift. You walk the gardens at dawn before anyone else is awake. You've stopped expecting anyone to follow, but sometimes someone does. A young concubine, a curious maid, a eunuch with a question he can't ask anyone else. They come, they sit, they listen, and you tell them the truth not in facts, but in stories. Stories that sound like dreams, or warnings, or both. The rumors start again, as they always do when things are quiet. This time they take on a strange edge, not just scandal, but the supernatural. It begins with a servant who claims to have seen your reflection blink when you were asleep. Then a court musician swears that your name was whispered by a wind that blew through a closed room. You become, once more than a woman. You're an omen, a superstition, a figure of whispered power and hidden rituals. Not everyone believes it, of course, but enough do that the tension becomes something you can smell like burnt resin or unwashed silk. You're not surprised. Power leaves residue, and you've left plenty. The palace doesn't know how to handle women who don't vanish once. Their usefulness ends, so instead, they turn you into myth, and you lean into it, carefully. You begin wearing darker robes again, not morning black, but deep twilight shades with motifs of clouds, shadows, moonlit cranes. You walk slower, speak even more rarely. When people address you, you pause before replying, like the words have to pass through an unseen filter. You don't do it out of malice, you do it because it works. Fear, after all, is armor, and if they want to believe you're communing with ghosts or binding the wind to your will, let them. It's safer than letting them remember you're just a woman who once loved a man, who happened to be emperor, but not everyone is content to let you fade into legend. A junior minister, young, bookish, ambitious, decides to make his name by cleansing the court of unauthorized spiritual practices. He compiles a report. It's filled with citations, temple scrolls, obscure laws, and, of course, your name, not directly, but clearly. He refers to rituals beyond prescribed ceremony, to private consultations with monks not sanctioned by the Bureau of Rites. It's absurd, really. He's accusing you of praying the wrong way, of reading too deeply, of dreaming too vividly. When the petition reaches the emperor, it causes a stir, not because he's surprised he knows what the court thinks of you, but because it puts him in a bind. He can't punish you, you've done nothing criminal, but he also can't ignore the noise, so he chooses the middle path. He issues a polite but pointed statement. All members of the court are reminded to observe proper rituals and avoid private spiritual experimentation. No names, no blame, but the message is clear. Be quiet, be smaller, be gone. You receive the message the way you receive everything, in silence. You make no changes, but that night, you open one of your hidden scrolls, a dream journal. Really, though some would call it a diary, and you write a single line. They fear not what I do, but that I still breathe. Then you burn the page. The ash curls like a whisper and disappears into the dark. Historians still debate the purpose of your journals. Were they therapeutic, tactical, just poetic indulgence? One fringe theory claims you wrote fictional versions of palace life, changing names and outcomes, rewriting history and metaphor. Others think you wrote letters to your son, still born and long gone, as a way to anchor your grief. Whatever the truth, none of the journals survive. Some say you burned them all. Some say they were seized and destroyed during a later purge. A few believe they're hidden still, waiting to be found, beneath floorboards or sewn into cushions. Like everything else about you, the truth is wrapped in possibility. Meanwhile, the young minister who launched the petition doesn't rise. Instead, he vanishes, not publicly, just quietly moved to a low-level post in the provinces. No scandal, no disgrace, just distance. It's unclear who made the decision. Maybe the emperor, maybe the empress dowager, maybe one of your quiet allies who still remember which way the wind once blew. You hear about it weeks later, during tea. You nod once and say nothing. The palace moves on. Another concubine rises in favor. A new scandal breaks out involving miscounted grain taxes and forged seals. A comet appears in the eastern sky, and the astrologers argue for days about what it means. You watch it from your balcony. It doesn't frighten you. You've seen bigger omens, real ones, ones that walk in robes and write poetry and die with your name still pressed to their tongue. Your status is still high, but ceremonial now. You don't sit in on council. You don't review documents. But when you walk, people still bow. When you speak, they still listen. There's power in memory. You become a living relic, a warning, a legend, a lesson. And you use that. When a young court lady comes to you crying, afraid her new station has made her a target, you sit with her, pour her tea, tell her the truth. They will never stop watching you. So make them watch you win. She leaves steadier. 2 weeks later, she's promoted. Coincidence? Maybe. But in this palace, belief often outweighs fact. One lesser known tale from this time. It said you took to walking the palace at night, alone. No lantern, just footsteps on cold stone. Servants claimed they heard you humming. One even swore you vanished into a wall. Ridiculous, of course, but the story stuck because people needed them to. A woman who won the emperor's heart, survived his death, outlasted his enemies, and still wandered the palace like a question no one dared answer. That was a story worth fearing. You begin to notice shadows that don't belong, not the ones cast by lanterns or moonlight, but the ones that linger a moment too long after people walk away, the ones that whisper your name in the hush between footsteps, there's talk now bolder than before that you've been keeping forbidden texts in your quarters. Not love letters, not poetry scrolls, but actual banned material, writings on dreams, divination, commentaries once condemned by court scholars for confusing the natural order. And to make it worse, someone claims to have seen you reading them out loud. To whom? That's where the rumors split. Some say to yourself, some say to the Emperor's spirit. One particularly unhinged version insists you were reading to a mirror, which flickered in response. You become, once again, the fascinating to leave alone. The accusation starts in the Office of Rights, where doctrine and paranoia share. A cubicle, a group of officials, still sore from your long survival, begin assembling a dossier. It includes scroll fragments they swear were copied from your chambers, lists of titles you allegedly requested, testimonies from maids to junior to question and eunuchs too afraid to resist. It's all circumstantial, weak, but enough to stir concern. The Empress Dowager, still clad in the chilly serenity of her rank, doesn't say anything outright. She just lets the process unfold. That's the skill of the palace no one needs to push when gravity will do the job. When the formal inquiry reaches you, it comes not as an accusation, but as a courtesy inspection, a polite phrase for a veiled threat. Officials arrive, dressed in neutral silks, eyes blank, hands gloved. They bow, request permission to examine your scroll collection. Your reply is gracious. Of course, you say, you've nothing to hide, and you mean it. You've already moved everything questionable elsewhere. What remains is carefully curated, classics, permitted histories, mild poetry. They find nothing, but they linger, ask questions about your reading habits, your visitors, your nightly routines. One even picks up a scroll and casually remarks, interesting choice. You'll flinch, just smile, and say, history often chooses us, don't you think? He doesn't reply. When they leave, the message is clear. They couldn't catch you, but they'll try again and again until you give them a reason. You don't panic. You do what you always do. Adjust. You reduce your scroll collection. You stop receiving visitors after sundown. You dismiss 2 of your newest maids quietly. Without drama, you plant copies of your most innocuous poems around your chambers. In case of future inspections, you burn the rest. Historians still debate what, if anything, you were actually hiding. Some believe you did possess forbidden text, early drafts of heterodox philosophies, or writings from women scholars whose names had been erased. Others think it was a political trap, invented to test your balance. A few suggest you faked the entire rumor to remain relevant. That's unlikely, but then again, with you, unlikely is often just another word for possible. The next week, a new rule is circulated through the palace. All texts in private possession must be cataloged and submitted for review by the Interlibrary Bureau. It's not a law, just a recommendation, but everyone understands. This is about you. A net cast wide enough to be called fair, but aimed at one very specific fish. You comply. Of course, submit your list, curated down to the leaf. Nothing controversial, nothing rare, nothing real. And in the meantime, the whispers grow. They say you no longer sleep, that you walk your chambers tracing characters into the air with your finger, that your turtles have learned to respond to your voice, that your bonsai trees flower out of season. It's nonsense, but nonsense is powerful here, and the truth is you've changed. You speak less, smile only when necessary. You've become, still, like a statue left in a hallway so long it forgets it was once a person. One fringe rumor claims that a maid once tried to sneak a peek at your private writing box and went blind for 3 days. Another says a bird flew into your chamber, circled your mirror 3 times, and died mid-air. The stories are ridiculous, but they work. You become untouchable not because you are feared, but because fear has become the only safe way to explain you. No one dares to look too closely, and that suits you just fine, because behind all this theater, you're still watching. You see how power is shifting again. The new emperor is no longer a boy. He makes decisions now. He's distancing himself from the old factions, his mother included. He listens, but selectively. You suspect he respects you, in a quiet, observational way. Once, he sends you a poem, anonymous, of course, just 6 lines, folded into a basket of early peaches. But you recognize the rhythm and the message. We all build ladders. Yours reached the roof. You never reply, but the next day, you leave a single peach on the sill where the palace cats sometimes sleep. It's gone by noon. The inquiry into your books fades. Quietly, no charges, no follow-up, just a ripple absorbed back into the larger tide. And you go back to tending your turtles. You replace your mirror not because you believe the rumors, but because the old one cracked in the corner, or maybe you nudged it. Either way, it's gone now. A new one takes its place, polished, cold, waiting. You no longer walk with an entourage, not because you've lost favor. On the contrary, your name still carries weight, but because you've become an institution unto yourself, a relic wrapped in brocade, a shrine of quiet defiance that no one knows quite how to dismantle. The court strategy now is not to attack you, but to isolate you, to let time do what politics couldn't. You're allowed to remain. You're even revered, in a way, but only as long as you stay still, decorative, silent, unthreatening. You're given a new resonance, technically a reward, but clearly a maneuver farther from the heart of the palace. Tucked behind a small courtyard where the grass grows uneven and the walls are just a shade duller than before. There are attendants, of course, eunuchs, maids, guards, but none of them are your own. They're assigned, rotated regularly, and far too polite to trust. But you know how to read a room. This is exile dressed as privilege, and yet it doesn't surprise you. It's just the final form of power here, containment. You've seen it used on others, on ambitious ministers, on disobedient generals, on one's favored wives. You are simply next in line for the velvet box, and so you adapt. You always do. You begin your days earlier now, before the courtyard wakes. You walk the garden alone, wrapped in a shawl that still smells faintly of incense from a room you'll never see again. You sip tea brewed the way you like it, not too hot, with a pinch of dried orange peel, a habit from Suzhou you never shook. You write, not scrolls this time, but small fragments, half poems, thought echoes. The garden forgets my name, but the moss remembers where I stepped. You hide them in flower pots, under stones, in the folds of cushions, not because anyone will find them, but because you need to leave something behind that isn't embroidered or recorded. Your robes are still fine, your food still warm, your rank still etched into every conversation, every bow, every sideways glance, but you are being unrooted. Slowly, deliberately, the documents stop mentioning you, the tributes stop arriving, the women of the court stop visiting. Though they send gifts, sachets of lavender, embroidered fans, sometimes a book with a petal tucked inside, symbols, apologies, proof that they remember, even if they cannot afford to stand beside you. One day, a mirror is removed from your room without explanation. The eunuchs claim it was cracked. You don't argue. You know better. You know that mirrors aren't taken for damage. They're taken for what they reflect. You spend that evening with the window open, staring into the dark until the oil lamp gutters out on its own. Historians would later call this your period of quiet exile, though it wasn't exile in any formal sense. You weren't banished. You weren't stripped of titles. But the result was the same. You were kept, shelved, left to fade. One scholar argued it was the court's way of restoring harmony after a reign colored too deeply by personal favor. Another called it a mercy. She was too dangerous to forget, to love to destroy. But you don't feel merciful. You feel erased. Carefully, methodically, sweetly erased. One fringe detail worth noting. It said you began cultivating a small grove of orchids in your courtyard, each one named after a different woman from the court who had vanished under mysterious or political circumstances. Whether this is true, no one can prove, but the flowers were real, rare, fragile, and always blooming, even in winter, when the rest of the garden slept and still. There are visits, quiet ones. A senior eunuch stops by once a week with news, though it's mostly half-truths laced with court-approved flavor. A scholar brings you annotated versions of texts you once requested cleansed, of course, made palatable for an empire that no longer wants you to think too deeply. A former attendant, now aging into the same quiet, redundancy you wear like a second skin, kneels beside you one day and asks, was it worth it? You say nothing, just pour her tea, because how do you answer that? Was it worth the climb, the love, the power, the loss, worth the songs, the poems, the silks, the ghosts? Some days, you think yes. Some nights, you wake with your hands clenched and think no. Most of the time, you just don't think about it at all. You're not in the story anymore. You're what comes after. And yet, despite it all, you're still here. The palace knows it. The courtiers know it. The new generation of concubines, raised on rumors of your rise and survival, still glance in the direction of your courtyard as they pass, as if expecting the wind to shift, as if afraid that the silence they've been taught to revere might one day answer back. You've become a warning, a blueprint, a tale told in too low voices by people who don't know you, but pretend they do. Some say you outlived your use, others whisper that you're simply waiting, that one day, when the palace forgets itself, you'll remind it what it means to build an empire on something other than etiquette and caution. Until then, you walk your garden, you write your fragments, you sip your tea, you endure. The emperor dies in early spring. No fanfare, no dramatic final words, just a quiet slip beneath the brocade. One night, he retires after a court session. By morning, he's cold. The news spreads with careful restraint, as though too much emotion might upset the afterlife. His son ascends before the incense finishes burning in the morning halls. You receive the announcement not through a formal courier, but through a eunuch who stammers too much and bows too deeply. They're testing your reaction. They want to see if you flinch, if you rise, if you send a note. You do none of these. You bow your head. You light a stick of sandalwood incense, and you return to trimming your orchids. You're not invited to the funeral rites. You don't expect to be. You don't mourn in the court's language of banners and bronze bells. You mourn with silence, with presence, with the way you fold your robes with perfect symmetry every morning. They try to pretend you're just another figure in the archives now, one former consort among many. But the palace doesn't move on as cleanly as it wants to, because the people who know the Carters best, the ones who light the candles, who wash the robes, who carry the trays, they still whisper your name when the air turns strange, not out of affection, but reverence, because you're still here. And that means something the records won't say, but the walls remember. Your isolation deepens. They don't exile you. They don't strip your title. They simply stop, acknowledging your existence. Your requests go unanswered. Your attendants are replaced again. Your garden begins to grow wild, the koi pond overrun with algae. You are a painting hung in a closed room, still framed, still valuable, but unseen. And yet, through all this, you remain. You water the orchids. You sweep your own courtyard. You mend your own robes, not because you've been abandoned, but because you've chosen not to rot. Then something unexpected happens. A rebellion, not in the palace, not in the city somewhere far to the west. A failed tax reform sparks it. A minor province flares like a splinter in an old wound. And the new emperor, barely settled into his role, begins to falter. His ministers argue. His generals circle like wolves who smell hesitation. The court fractures into whispers and factions. And once again, your name resurfaces, not as a candidate, not as a threat, but as a symbol. The rebellion's timing is strange. Some officials blame it on the stars. Others cite poor harvests. But a smaller group, the ones who've read too much, have forgotten how to stop thinking, start saying it's an echo of the past. That the disorder is the result of spiritual imbalance left unresolved by the former emperor. That someone who once held the center still sits unacknowledged, and the heavens are displeased. It's not a theory anyone dares write down, but it floats through servants' mouths, through junior ministers, through night carters filled with wood smoke and paranoia. And in those shadows, you feel a shift. Visitors return, first subtly, a eunuch with a question, a maid with a message, a minor consort with too many opinions and a few allies. They come to your gate, eyes lowered, asking nothing directly, but saying everything through tone and silence. You let them speak. You nod. You say very little, because you don't need to offer solutions. Your existence is already the answer. The rebellion is put down, of course, brutally, quickly, but the fear lingers. The emperor tightens his circle, begins purging officials who mutter too much or remember too clearly, and you, for a moment, are left alone again, but not erased. Not anymore, because now, you're not just a relic. You're a myth in motion. You've survived 3 emperors, a coup, a son's death, a court's disdain, and still, you walk the garden. That is a kind of magic no scholar can explain. Fringe rumors start again, that you can see people's futures in the steam of tea, that you sleep only every 3rd night, that your turtles now speak in your voice, ridiculous, but persistent. One particularly strange tale claims that your old mirror, the one removed during your quasi-exile, was shattered by accident, revealed characters on the reverse side. Your name, etched in seal script, surrounded by constellations, complete fabrication. But you hear it whispered by two eunuchs under your window. You don't correct them. One night, you dream of the emperor, not the first, not the last, but this time, he's sitting on a stool, not a throne, drinking something strong. He looks tired, not sick, just done. You ask him, in the dream, if he would do it all over again. He says yes. Then he laughs and says, "But I'd make you empress the first week just to watch them panic." You wake up smiling. That scares your maid more than anything. And then, slowly, the palace shifts. Again, time does its smoothing. New faces take over old posts. The names you once feared are retired, dead, forgotten. Even the Empress Dowager fades, no longer a figure of force, but of ritual. You, though, remain, a quiet presence, a memory in motion. And by now, even the people who hate you have grown used to your shadow. You're no longer the woman who outranked the Empress. You're the woman who outlasted the system built to contain her. Time, in the Forbidden City, moves like lacquer, hardening slow, gleaming, irreversible. And yet, against all odds, you keep moving with it, not in grand gestures or palace-shaking edicts, but in the smaller, stranger way survival insists on, having the final word. You are now the longest living woman in the palace's upper echelons. 3 reigns have passed before your eyes, for if you count the childhood interlude when the regency clung to protocol like a drowning man to driftwood, you watched them all, never as a ruler, never officially, but always close enough to see who blinked first when decisions had to be made. That's the kind of influence they can't chart on scrolls. And yet, power isn't what keeps you here now. It's inertia, legacy, the same reason you can't just be removed like a cracked teacup. You've become part of the structure, like a support beam painted over so many times they forget it isn't ornamental. Ministers speak your name with care now, not out of respect, but muscle memory. Even the young emperor, who rules with a more measured hand than his father, refers to you as the still one. It's not a title, but it functions like one. You get food no one else is served, news no one else hears. Occasionally, a folded note arrives with no sender, but the words inside are careful, pointed, loaded. They want your opinion, your blessing, your silence, and you give it most of the time, not because you crave relevance, but because you understand the game. Your advice no longer shapes the empire, but it shapes how the empire reflects on itself. If that sounds abstract, well, that's because it is. But in a palace where metaphors outweigh legislation, your silence can be more powerful than their scrolls. You maintain your routines. You still wake early, still tend your orchids, still keep a shelf of scrolls you never read but never remove. The turtles are fewer now, some died, others released, but the pond remains, murky and still. Much like everything else, one day you receive an unexpected visit, a young scholar, barely of age, sent by the inner library to catalog historical personalities. He wants to ask about your youth, your titles, your influence. He's nervous. You don't answer his questions. Instead, you ask him about his favorite poem. He stutters. You wait. Eventually, he recites one clumsy, heartfelt, and utterly forgettable. You nod, offer him tea, and say, "That's how I started, too." He doesn't return, but a month later, a new poem is circulated through court circles. It's about a tree that outlives 3 emperors and learns the language of wind. You never comment on it, but your maid finds you reading it twice. Historians argue over your later years. Some claim you faded into ritual, a ceremonial relic wheel, out for celebrations and then tucked away. Others say you played a deeper game, offering influence through others, shaping policy through suggestion. But the records are thin. You made sure of that, because true power isn't about being remembered. It's about controlling how others remember you. One detail that survives from this period is your refusal to wear red. Once the color of imperial passion, of weddings and power, you switch entirely to gray, jade, and ivory. It's a statement, one so quiet that it roars. Red becomes something others wear. You outgrew it, and in a world obsessed with symbolism, that's the kind of decision that ripples without moving. Meanwhile, the empire lurches forward, new threats, old enemies, provinces that rebel on schedule like they're reading from a script, and through it all, the court holds together, Mostly, not because it's strong, but because it's afraid of change. And you, ironically, have become a symbol of stability, not because you preserved the old ways, but because you survived every attempt to erase them. That's how irony works here. It bows before you, slightly confused, but respectful nonetheless. Fringe rumor emerges that you once met with a foreign envoy disguised as a maid to pass a message about the imperial attitude toward maritime trade, completely unsubstantiated, of course, but strangely persistent. People love the idea that you're still pulling strings, even in silence, and why not? You've done it before. What's one more thread in a palace built of them? Your health, surprisingly, remains intact. No dramatic illnesses, no collapses. In the courtyard, just the slow fade of age, eyes a little duller, steps a little slower, voice softer, but somehow heavier. When you speak, people still stop talking, not out of deference, out of curiosity, because they know that when you speak, now, it matters. You once said that the most dangerous person in the palace was the one who had nothing left to lose. You never imagined you become her. Then, one day, during a seasonal rite for the emperor's ancestors, you are unexpectedly invited, not as a guest, as an observer, a quiet presence among the living statues. You sit in the back, say nothing. But when the ceremony ends, the emperor walks past and nods at you, just once. No words, no gesture, just acknowledgement. It's not much, but in this palace, it's a thunderclap in silk, and that night, you sleep without dreams, in a place where history is usually written by the victors, and women like you are relegated to whispers between scrolls. The mere fact that you are still being spoken of is victory enough. Not loudly, of course no one in the palace speaks. Loudly unless they're shouting at someone beneath them, but you hear it, in the shuffle of feet when you pass, in the lowered tones at tea houses tucked into the court's belly like forgotten gods. The phrase one guy fight no longer conjures scandal or pity, it conjures intrigue, a kind of reverent unease. You've lived long enough to become a ghost before death, not in mourning clothes or superstitious fear, but in the way your life refuses to fit cleanly into the categories the empire loves so much. You were a consort, but you outranked the empress. You had no surviving children, but reshaped dynastic succession. You were never crowned, yet your shadow sits beside every throne that came after. The young generation of court ladies are bolder now. Some wear their hair like you once did, combed in the subtle twist only older attendants remember. They mimic your calligraphy style. You see it in invitations, in thank you notes, in festival dedications penned with that same diagonal flair that no calligraphy tutor would teach, but which everyone recognizes. They're not trying to flatter, they're trying to figure out how you did it, how you stayed, how you moved without moving. A few even approach you under the guise of poetry readings or incense appreciation. They ask vague questions. You give even vaguer answers. How did you survive so many courts? One asks. You respond. I never asked to be listened to. I simply made silence uncomfortable. She writes that down. You never see her again. Historians still argue whether your role in shaping imperial politics was overblown by later generations eager for stories. Some suggest you were simply an imperial ornament with accidental entrance. Others insist you were the first true empress in all but name, a strategist in silk. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the tension between those extremes. You didn't seek power, but you never let go once it found you, and that's not ambition, that's instinct. One scholar, generations later, will describe you as the palace's long pause, not an interruption, a space between actions that redefine what came next. He'll write it in a footnote. The emperor at the time will underline it. That line will survive dynasties, even when your name is forgotten. In bureaucratic records, the pause remains. By now, your world has shrunk. You no longer stroll the full length of the palace. Your knees ache. Your breath catches on cold mornings, but you still rise before the sun. You still sit by the pond, though the turtles are gone now. You still drink your tea with the same three-finger hold your mother taught you when you were 12, and thought the world ended at the market gates in Suzhou. And then, one morning, a letter arrives. Not a scroll, not a summons, a letter written in plain hand, bearing no official seal. It's from a retired palace scribe now living on the outskirts of the capital. He says he's compiling personal accounts of significant court women, wants to include you, says no one else remembers what really happened. His tone is careful, almost apologetic. He offers to visit. If your health permits, you burn the letter, not in anger, not even in contempt, just in quiet understanding. There are some stories that don't belong to the record. Yours is one of them. Instead, you sit with your maid and have her read poetry aloud, not yours, not the emperor's, old pieces, anonymous ones, works with no footnotes. That's the life you prefer now. You were once a name. Now you're a silence with weight, the kind that changes the air when people walk through it. One fringe theory, never widely accepted, insists you trained a group of maids in political strategy, forming a silent sisterhood that influenced later generations. There's no evidence for it, but the court certainly saw a shift in the decades after your time arise and educated, politically adept women who knew how to bend protocol without breaking it. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps just a rippled dot in your final years. Your quarters are cleaned less frequently, not out of neglect, but out of respect. The dust gathers slowly, like the air is trying to preserve your breath in layers. The orchids are overgrown, but blooming wildly. The pond is still. No fish, just water, waiting. Even the wind seems to pause longer at your doors, as if listening. You keep writing, but now the pages are shorter. Not poems, not quite, just thoughts. There are no seasons in the Forbidden City, only moods. A throne is just a chair too far away to reach from the floor. I never needed power. I only needed them to think I had it. You tuck these lines into drawer seams, between cushions, under tea trays. You don't care who finds them. You don't expect anyone to. But just in case, you no longer fear death. Not because you believe in an afterlife, but because you've already lived so many versions of yourself. Maiden, mother, widow, ghost. What's one more? You've outlasted enemies, outlived allies. And now, in the stillness of your aging breath, you begin to feel your story settle not in finality, but in echo. One morning, long after the bells stop meaning anything, you wake up and don't recognize the ceiling. It's the same ceiling it's always been plain, wooden, untouched since your last decoration 10 years ago, but something about it feels foreign, not threatening, not wrong, just not yours. Like you've stepped into someone else's life without meaning to. The sensation pauses, but it leaves a silence behind it, and you lie there for a long while, unmoving, listening. To what? You're not even sure. The birds outside have gone quiet, or maybe they've stopped bothering with your window altogether. After all, you haven't left the quarters in weeks. Your world has narrowed to a few rooms, a hallway, the memory of a garden. Even the orchids have gone feral now, stretching into corners they were never meant to reach. You sit up slowly. Your back aches. The maid offers to help, but you wave her off. You still have enough pride left for that. You shuffle to your writing table. Not to write, just to look. The inkstone hasn't been used in months. The brushes are dry, but the weight of it all comforts you. This was always where you felt most like yourself, not in the emperor's chambers, not a court, but here, surrounded by thoughts no one else could see. You run your fingers across the rim of a porcelain cup and wonder how many women passed through this palace without even a word to mark them. You, at least, will be remembered. Or if not remembered, then misremembered beautifully. And maybe that's better. Your maid brings tea. You don't drink it. Instead, you ask her to open the window. She hesitates. It's late in the season, cold wind. But she obeys. You sit there as it drifts in, sharp and clean, brushing against your face like a forgotten childhood. You close your eyes and let it carry you backward, to Suzhou, to your mother's soft reprimands, to the river banks where you once pretended your shadow was a noble woman's. You smile at the arrogance, the foolishness, the prophecy of it. People still talk about you, of course, even now. In the kitchens, among junior concubines who've only ever heard your name in cautionary tones. Don't end up like Lady Wang, they say. Meaning what? Exactly. To powerful, to visible, too much. You don't know. You don't care. You've made peace with the contradiction. You were a caution and a blueprint, a danger and a delight. You were a mirror in a world that hated its own reflection, and the emperor the first one. Your emperor still visits you in dreams. Not often, just enough. Sometimes he's young again, leaning against a garden wall with ink-stained sleeves, and eyes tired for his age. Sometimes he's older, quiet, brushing your hair like he used to when he thought you were asleep. He never speaks in these dreams. You do. You tell him about the empire, about how it kept going, about how the walls didn't crumble when he left. He always looks a little surprised, and then he nods, and then he's gone. One evening, your maid finds you sitting in the dark, having forgotten to light the lamps. You're staring at nothing, your fingers curled around a folded piece of silk. She asks if you need help. You shake your head. You whisper, "Do they still talk about me?" She says yes, of course they do. You nod, more to yourself than her. That night, you sleep more deeply than you have in years. A few days later, the palace doctors are summoned, not urgently, just routinely. They examine you, pale tongue, slow pulse, lungs tired, nothing dramatic, just the kind of slow, unglamorous. The kind that doesn't make poems. They offer tonics. You refuse. You ask for quiet instead, and they give it to you. In the final weeks, your quarters begin to fill with things no one else sees. Not ghosts, not illusions, just presence. The emperors laugh in the corner, the faint set of your son's hair, the sound of your name said with affection instead of accusation. They're not real, but they're yours. That's what matters. One morning, you don't wake, you don't stir, you just remain. Your maid finds you with your hands folded, face turned slightly toward the open window. Outside, a single orchid leans into the cold and refuses to wilt. There is no state funeral, no imperial bells, but word spreads faster than expected. By evening, copies of your poems begin circulating the city again. Someone recites one on a street corner. A widow hears it and cries. A scholar copies it by hand and adds a line of his own. A child draws a crane in the dirt and calls it the lady's bird. You're buried quietly, no fanfare. But a year later, the emperor, your emperor's grandson, issues an edict to restore the title. Imperial noble consort Juan. Not legally necessary, just symbolically appropriate. It says more about him than about you, but still, it happens. And that's enough. In the decades that follow, your name becomes legend, a symbol for palace power, for impossible survival, for love that outlived empire. Some call you a queenmaker, others, a soft tyrant. A few brave souls say what everyone really feels. You were too much, and the empire was never meant to hold you, but it did, for a while. And that's the story. Now your story settles, like dust on silk. The candles burn lower, the room folds into quiet. The hallways of the forbidden city grow colder as the night deepens, and the walls that once listened to your breath are asleep. Now, too, there's nothing more to chase, nothing more to prove. You've left no statues, number palaces named in your honor, but you've left impressions in footsteps, in fragrance, in the hush that falls when your name is spoken. You were not the empress, you were not the victor, you were something else, something stranger, a presence that refused to disappear. So rest now. Let the corridors fade, the courtiers drift away. Let the echoes curl up in the corners and doze off, one by one. You've survived the fire, outlived the storm, and carried your story longer than anyone ever expected. There are no more scrolls to sign, no more mirrors to cover. Just this moment, just this quiet, just you. Let your last breath drift out like steam from tea, warm, invisible, necessary. You're done. In a script. Sweet dreams.